All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes debut novelist and filmmaker Marlowe Granados, who will discuss her amusingly mischievous debut, Happy Hour. Granados tonight will be in conversation with award-winning director and author Sandi Tan. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Marlowe and Sandi, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even, and you will be able to find this book on our front shelves, front and center on display right now, as the book came out yesterday. So we are very happy to celebrate the publication of this book. We are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, towards the end of the hour. So please type your questions as a comment, and we will get to those for the audience Q&A portion. Be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. Now, about tonight's book, Happy Hour. With the verve and bite of Ottessa Moshfegh and the barbed charm of Nancy Mitford, Marlowe Granados' stunning debut brilliantly captures a summer of striving in New York City. Refreshing and wry in equal measure, Happy Hour is an intoxicating novel of youth well spent. Issa Epley is all of 21 years old and already wise enough to understand that the purpose of life is the pursuit of pleasure. She arrives in New York City for a summer of adventure with her best friend, one newly blonde Gala Novak. They have little money, but that's hardly going to stop them from having a good time. In her diary, Issa describes a sweltering summer in the glittering city. By day, the girls sell clothes in a market stall, pinching pennies for their Bed-Stuy, sublet, and bodega lunches. By night, they weave from Brooklyn to the Upper East Side to the Hamptons among a rotating cast of celebrities, artists, internet entrepreneurs, stuffy intellectuals, and bad-mannered grifters. Resources run ever tighter, and the strain tests their friendship as they try to convert their social capital into something more lasting than precarious gigs as au pairs, nightclub hostesses, paid audience members, and aspiring foot fetish models. Through it all, Issa's bold, beguiling voice captures the precise thrill of cultivating a life of glamour and intrigue as she juggles paying her dues with skipping out on the bill. Happy Hour is a novel about getting by and looking great in a system that wants you to do neither. Rumaan Alam, the author of Leave the World Behind, says, a dreamy account of one heady summer, Marlowe Granados' debut is a dispatch from another land, not only New York City, but youth itself. Happy Hour is aptly titled. It's an intoxicating book, at once heartbreaking and joyful. And now about tonight's speakers. Marlowe Granados is a writer and filmmaker. She co-hosts The Mean Reds, a podcast dedicated to women-led films, and her advice column, Designs for Living, appears in The Baffler. Granados currently resides in Toronto, and Happy Hour is her debut novel. And tonight, Marlowe will be in conversation with Sandi Tan. Sandi was born in Singapore. She directed the Netflix film Shirkers, which won a directing award at the Sundance Film Festival, was named Best Documentary by the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, and was shortlisted for the Oscar for Best Documentary. The Black Isle was her debut novel, and Lurkers was her new novel, which just came out in March or April. She's lived in Los Angeles for 20 years, but everyone still thinks she lives in New York. And you can find her on Instagram at _SandiTan_. And now, without further ado, I am very happy and proud to welcome our guests for the evening, Marlowe Granados and Sandi Tan for Left Bank Books. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so happy to have you here with us this evening. I love small press fiction and think that this is just such a wonderful way to celebrate. I'm so happy to have you back, Sandi. We got to launch Sandi's book when it came out. Was it March or was it
March?
April?
It was March.
March, okay.
It was March. It seems like a long time ago, but yeah, it was just March.
Yeah. And Marlowe, it's so fantastic to have you here. I'm really excited to introduce you to our audience.
Hello.
Thanks for inviting me to do this. You kind of know my taste, I guess, Sean. But anyway, so hi, Marlowe. Your book.
Hi.
I loved your book. It's so exuberantly, when you read it, you think it's so exuberantly you, whatever you are, whoever you are. You read it and you think you know that person because it's a diary of this young woman who's 21. Spending summer in New York, 2013, and I think you chose 2013 because it's pre, it's also when you were 21ish, but also pre everybody looking at their cell phones, social media, Twitter, and this is like so pure because you had to go to a bar to run into somebody, and you go into a lot of bars and you run into a lot of somebody's.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because even when I was younger, it was just before I think like Instagram was really big. And I think at that time, especially when you're kind of in that mode, I at least know that like me and my friends rarely would open our laptops. That was just like, especially in the summer, it was like nothing we did except for when we had to like look for weird jobs. Like that was the only time we would open our laptop. And I also think that like I've still kind of, to an extent, like still use the internet in a certain way where I'm either always like trying to like meet up with someone or like make a plan for something, or I'm usually trying to like find. I have a really big like shopping problem, so that is like the other thing that I use my computer for. But I'm very bad at like everything else with it.
Yeah, I love the book because it just begins like you land in New York. And it doesn't say where you're from, who you are, what you do. And as the book goes along, which is a series of diary entries of your summer, you kind of piece together who Issa Epley is. And then you learn that it's a name that she gave herself. And she's completely self-made in the most wonderful way. And she's so observant and she's learning everything around, you can tell that she's already rich with experience from having lived in London and moved around in social circles that you don't think somebody like of her age and her kind might be moving around in. And I just love that. You just kind of learn that along the way. And that's just it, because she bursts onto the page as that, and I was just wondering how much, because the Issa Epley is the creation of Issa Epley. And I was wondering if Marlowe Granados is also a creation.
It's a creation. Me?
Well, it's Marlowe your real name. It's basically my fancy way of asking that.
Right. I mean, I guess the whole thing is that like the experiment with the novel, I think, also with like I think how I've experienced building my own identity and like the way that I am and like my own personality, like I think that it's the idea of how you can kind of like force yourself to be in situations in ways that aren't supernatural to you, and like how you can kind of teach yourself in a certain way how you may have like a natural charm, but like how you can kind of like wield that to your advantage in ways that like you are becoming like more and more strategic and also like wise to the world. And I think I've always had that kind of combination of knowledge and like having to like live in certain ways that require that kind of knowledge. But I guess like what I thought was always really funny was that like I was like, obviously I would give her qualities that were me. Like that made the most sense, because I was also like what else would I do? Like make her like white or something. Like it's like so bizarre to me. I think that like for other people it would be like, so it would like might be a little bit more simple, but like I'm so obviously have like such a distinct like history and family history, whatever, that it was like I don't know how to like write it authentically as anything else. And I think that was kind of the main thing. And I always like to say that it's like an inside joke to people who know. Like if you really know me and you kind of like know, like you'll kind of have hints and kind of like guess about like what is what. And I actually had a friend today message me being like, I know I read the book ages ago, but I was wondering about this one particular thing. Like who was that based on? And I was like, I'm not going to tell.
Has there been anyone who's kind of read it and was like flattered or annoyed that you painted them in a certain way?
I mean, I've talked about this a lot. So I do have a real friend named Gala, and we've known each other forever, and we're still friends now, shockingly. And you know, like she's been with me through the whole process of this novel and me writing it. And I kind of told her like very early on, I was like, I'm gonna like have a character named after you. It's gonna be like a thing. It's gonna be like kind of based on like when we were young, because we've known each other since we were 15. So like I always say like, you know, this novel, as much as it is like a summer when these girls are 21, it was based on so much of like what I experienced from when I was like 15 and when I started going out onwards. So a lot of things are kind of mixed in. And for a while she was like, okay, great, like wanted to be super supportive. But then finally, once I had a kind of a more substantial manuscript, I gave it to her to read. And I remember her being like, she took like a whole year. She took a whole year because she was like,
Yeah.
I don't know, Marlowe. Like, I mean, I support you, but then I think that she was just upset that I think there were certain parts of her that were maybe like in there. But then also, I think like as we all get older, there are certain parts of us that we don't want to recognize were true from when we were young. So she was like, I was never like that. And I was like, okay, what? Like doesn't really matter anymore, because kind of in the same way that it's a diary in form in the novel. The whole point and the kind of like reason why I wanted to make it like that was because at the end of the day, like Issa is the one that has the last word. And I think that's like a really important thing to kind of like talk about in terms of form, is like how like an actual physical diary at some point is the only like relic that exists of that memory that like we can only rely on, right?
Yeah. And I love what you said. There was this, you know, when you talked about writing the diary, when you acknowledged that this was a diary near the end of the book, and you said, this is like sealing a part of myself to safety as you were writing it. As soon as it's written down, it's safe, you know? And I love that. It's like, it's so rare to have somebody kind of encapsulate the experience of like, you know, making the experience safe because you've actually captured it. And then I also love that how you said grief is a currency I will not use. And I love that. Like this girl, she's 21 and she goes around and some bad things, not really bad, horrible things, but just, you know, minor mishaps as young people get, but she's never a victim. She always, you know, pulls herself up again. And then she's always going off in search of the next adventure. And she's very unapologetic. And, you know, these things, I think I told you that, I love these little lines where, you know, you acknowledge that, I think there was this passage about abortions or something. And you said, you mentioned like, I once too had a little interloper, and you say in such a breezy style. I mean, that is you know, you're very deliberate in that style. You just will not go to the place of self-pity or darkness, and you just keep plodding on. And it's just great. And I wonder where that comes from.
I think that like in a way, you know, when you're young and you start like kind of getting into writing and you get really, you're like super dramatic and really angsty. And I think I definitely had that experience when I was like, you know, when I was writing and I was like in high school. And I remember just being like, oh, like this is just like what is serious. This is like what must be serious, because we're like talking about all these like this like unearthing of all this like anguish and all these things. And like I remember then like afterwards, like periods of time when I would like read back and I'd be so embarrassed because I'd be like, this is so like, I don't know, I would have this like feeling about it. And I think that ultimately I'm also an extremely like unsentimental person. And I think that also is like kind of in the novel where I feel like it's very unsentimental, and it's not
Yes,
really
it's great.
interested in not moping perhaps, but like languishing in like a bad feeling. I think that like
Mhm.
it's not interested in that as a form.
Yeah.
And I think that's also in general, like I think my instinct to do that, and also like the instinct of the novel to do that, is based on survival and resilience. And I think that it's not necessarily like the best thing, and I don't think either is like good or bad, but I think it's definitely a sign of when someone has had to keep on moving.
Mhm.
And not be able to like process something
Yeah.
properly.
No, I think it's great because there's this wonderful scene in this novel later on where she's, she goes on a series of adventures. She meets all these people, and sometimes, as a reader, you can see that these people aren't being very nice to her, but she doesn't wallow in
Mhm.
that. And then it leads up to this climactic almost weekend in the Hamptons, which is amazing, so well written because you don't wallow in that. And she's being kind of treated badly, but it's not written that way. It's like you're relishing the kind of, you're an anthropologist, you're out in the field and you're doing field work, you're not the victim. But the reader will sense that you're being put in not the most private suite, but actually the hottest room in the garret in the
Mhm.
house and that kind of stuff. And I just love that because you assume that your reader is smarter um, than
Yeah.
than than one should assume. And I think that's just brilliant. And I wonder if some of your friends who've read it are kind of surprised by the level of sophistication and wit. Because sometimes in life, we're so much better on paper. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I wonder if
That's interesting. You know what? I
because
will admit.
there's so much artistry. It seems invisible, but I know it's really hard.
Thank you, because it's interesting because I know when other people are writers, like they kind of recognize that, but like my friends are not, like they have no idea. They were like, "Oh, does everyone get like a New York Times?" They were like, "Does everyone get like this big thing?" And I was like, no, like, I don't know how to explain it to you, but like it doesn't happen all the time like that. But the thing about it is that I think what happens to them is because they're around me all the time. Like I've always been like a really good like storyteller in within my friendships. Like it's always like after, always ever since I was young, it would be like after a weekend out or something, or a night out, the next day they knew I would be like, like barreling in with some sort of like thing. And this like performative aspect of like my personality is very much like, and then this happened, and then he said this, and isn't that disgusting? So I think that like a lot of my really good friends, and I know that this might sound like very unsupportive, but I swear to you, like they have not read it.
Yeah,
They
no,
will-
I'm fine. I tell my friends not to watch my movies or read my books. It's fine because sometimes
I mean, I don't
it's
even tell
fine.
them
It
to
doesn't
not
matter.
do it. They just don't do it because they're like, well, I'm around you all the time. And then it's like an overload of this kind of like thing. And I wouldn't even say that like they think it's like the same, but they hear me like reading it to them, which I think is like too intimate for like a friendship that where they see me quite often and I'm always on the phone with them. So I mean,
Mhm.
I think that what happens, generally speaking, with those friends that have read it, they're often like, oh, like I didn't, they recognize certain aspects. And I think it's usually like the darker aspects of it, or like the more like grief stricken aspects of it, where they're like
Those are so brief.
very.
Those are so brief because you never pause to do that until the end, which is extremely well structured.
Thank you. I mean, all these things that you're complimenting me on, there was definitely criticisms for me at the beginning
Oh, okay.
of trying to get it published for sure. Um, yeah,
Can
I
I
think
ask you, like, like for like trying to get published and all this kind of stuff? Do you think that sometimes the culture doesn't know what to do with a young woman who wants to party, who's not apologetic, who goes and has these things happen to her, but she never for a single second wallows in being a victim. The usual narrative of bad things happen to women and young women, and she has to break this, kind of victim screed. And
yeah.
what are your feelings about that kind of thing?
Well, Definitely, they had a problem with that. I mean, I think it's also very confusing because I like wasn't white, and I had this. They were like, well, where is this like narrative that they want to like? There was, I get it. It's like an industry. They like need to sell. They have to have like a corner of which they're selling from. That makes sense. And
And
you
they would
know,
want you to make more of like being treated badly sometimes, and you have to, telegraph it more for the dumb reader or something, right?
yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely something that people were criticizing it about, like every time when we tried to get this published. And like the thing is that for me is like ultimately when I was writing it, like that was not part of my. That was like literally all those reasons are the reasons why I wrote it. Like to be like the opposite of that. Like I don't want these
Exactly.
girls to be punished, and I don't want them to have to like
Exactly.
answer for these consequences. And like I also think that like it's so true to life that when you're a young woman, like often what happens is that you're just kind of like going through the world in a way that is very, oh, like this might be like it might feel like the end of the world today, but tomorrow like you'll still maybe go out, you'll still probably like go to your like weird like $12 an hour job and like
Yeah.
and like make it through because like at some point you have to like you don't have that kind of privilege in a way to be able to really like wallow in it and people don't really understand. I think that like that often like what's misunderstood about that is like not is like almost like you're glossing over something that is like integral to the story where I think that like
Yeah. No,
you're
I
actually
think it's great. I think
have.
what you've done is so new and so good because it's true to life and true to a lot of people's lives, that they're not
Mhm.
wallowing in these horrible feelings or whatever, and self-pity, and they're just moving on and doing stuff and being, it's just really vibrant and fresh. So that's my main thing that I love. I mean, I loved in the book. It's like
Thank
it's so
you.
fresh to read about this young woman doing things and not being like self-pitying or awkward or embarrassed and all these kind of like the things, I mean, the things that so much of the literary world is built on, that that kind of boring stuff. And
Mhm.
it's or at least the kind of like, oh, bad things happen to me and I'm having to feel really badly for myself about it, that kind of that strand. And I think it's really great if you're leading the charge in a new, like a kind of a new confident young women's literature, because I think that's a great thing.
I mean, thank you. The thing is that also I always try and tell people is that like even like the way that I was raised, you think I was allowed to cry in my room? Like
Wait, so
I wish.
in the book you it Issa reveals that her mom died when she was young, and you have read, I mean, I've read that that happened to you as well. And so you
Mhm.
were raised by your dad, and were you
I was
raised in
so I was
Canada?
raised by my mother. I was raised by my
Okay.
mother. I was living in Canada. I am from Toronto. Um, but yeah, I know similarly to the character, my mom died in my late teens, and then you're kind of like, at that point, I feel like when you're 20, like when it's been like a few years, it may seem like only like a few years to other people, but I think that like when you're kind of like dealing with the fact that you have like been like quote unquote like alone and without that kind of like support that you were so used to, it feels like so much longer, and like how you have to kind of navigate yourself
Yeah.
without any sort of structures. And I actually think that like in the language that Issa uses all the time, like she always talks in hyperbole. She's saying these things never happen, or this always happens, and that should happen. And like it's because like I think that when you're in that situation, um, you were kind of having to build your own rules and foundations of like how you see the world in a
Yeah.
way that like, doesn't have any sort of authority to it. So like it's all on you to be like,
Mhm.
this is how the world should work, and like this is how much respect I should like accept, and this is how like I should accept like dating, or like if I want to like in like how badly will I let someone treat me, etc. Like I think it's kind of all up to you at some point, especially when you're a young woman. That can be like quite daunting, and then like trying to really like navigate these kinds of social scenes as well, and the combination of that it really kind of throws you for a loop in ways that I think maybe some people don't know, but I think that a lot of people can recognize that when you all of a sudden like are left to your own resources.
Hmm. Yeah, and so you were in London as well for a few years.
I actually lived in London for 6 years, like on and off. So, like, and when I say off, I was like in New York. So I don't know. It was very odd.
I love that you're. I mean, um, a character later on describes you as a gypsy in a kind of a comical, derogatory way. But in some ways, you embrace that kind of thing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're turning every kind of derogatory, belittling comment into something that you completely lean into and have fun with, and I love that. That's kind of new. I feel.
Thank you. I mean, I also wanted there to be a lot of humor in it, and
Yeah, I love
there to
that.
be a sense of like lightness and because I've always called them, I've always called like Issa and Gal like these little sharks, and they can never go backwards. They're always just moving forward in ways that even to their detriment. Like, and I think that that's kind of the philosophy of it, and the way that they like kind of charge through New York is very particular as well. Because I think a lot of New York novels tend to use the city as like a test and like a way that can like shape characters. But I think that these girls are already so they're already so themselves.
They're
And
fully formed, and
yeah,
they come with more complicated histories than just coming from the burbs, or
yeah.
Ohio, and trying to make it in the big city.
Hmm.
They like Gala is like a Bosnian orphan or something, isn't she?
Yeah, like
Or,
a Bosnian refugee.
yeah,
Yeah.
refugee, and then Issa has her own complicated history, and it's like these people don't come like with you know um great, like wonderful, comfortable backgrounds,
Hmm.
expecting great things to happen to them. They just assume that everything's going to be tough, and they're just gonna. I love the bit where even the person you're subletting the place from is like trying to screw you over, and that's so
Hmm.
real. I mean, and everybody you meet on some level has got some kind of privilege, whether it's
Hmm. Totally.
some like they'll be like a starving artist, or they work in a restaurant, but they all they went to fancy schools, and they have stuff in the background brewing, whereas Issa and Gala just don't, and so they keep having to, but they're not going to let this stop them from having fun and to
Hmm.
know everything they want to know about New York. And I find that like that's really new as well, because I think in the old days, probably this all the classes and all the whatever, there were so many more. There was lack of, it was less porous. Society was less porous, I would say. And
Mm.
would you say that that's probably more true of New York now than London?
London is I think the problems in London are like so specific. And I think that I tried to bring that into the novel a little bit by having like a few British characters,
Yes.
and the way that like that is also a totally different language in terms of like
Yeah.
how people act and like the classist like nature
Mm-hmm.
of all the rules and
Yeah.
the social like standards that you have to have
Mm-hmm.
like when you're like entertained and like, being entertained by like British people
Mm-hmm.
from upper classes, like what you're supposed to do and like in the
Oh,
way
how
that
you're supposed to entertain them?
yeah, exactly. And it's this kind of like vice versa situation. And you just like a lot of the times the girls are especially Issa, she's like, why won't anyone just tell me outright like what I'm supposed to do? Because I'm not going to be able to guess just by like being here, and then people are going to be like extremely passive aggressive to me like the whole time I'm here. And I think that social mobility, it's so interesting because I think that actually like maybe in the past there were certain types of social mobility that was easier. Like I think that like when we think about like classically, like when we think about like flappers or whatever in the 20s, like the whole thing was that they would get like a job maybe for a few months,
Mm-hmm.
and they would like, get married off into a life that was like like better than where they had come from, because a lot of those times those girls were from like lower classes.
Mhm.
But now I think there's like so much, there's such a, I mean, if you were like, there's a joke about like, why don't they just give us the list of the who's in the 1%? That would make it life so much easier for us. But you know, that aside, like I think that now it's almost like there are so many different kinds of milieus and like social standings and like currencies that I think that people find important. So
Mhm.
it's like you can have like, you know, in some way like some sort of authenticity or like classically like money or like
Mhm.
highbrow culture and all these things. And I think that kind of is in the novel as well. Like you have all these different people that come from different worlds that also still feel above others in
Mhm.
always, and they'll always try
Yeah.
and find ways to like feel better.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that what is the kind of core thing about the book is that like even though they kind of start learning how to like play these things, it's not like they like really are drinking the Kool-Aid here. Like they're very much like, this is so silly.
Yeah, they're completely savvy, and they are sharks because they're not sentimental. They're slightly cynical, but yet kind of innocent about many things. Innocent enough to enjoy them, you know, and not be jaded about them. And do you think you know, maybe being Canadian and being from Toronto, it's kind of let you be a bit more of an outsider and more of an anthropologist of all these places and mores.
Hmm. I mean, I think that definitely I realized that I lived in London for 6 years. And like I was talking about this actually today, is that when I was living there for the first 2 years, I actually found it very like I loved it. I think I was really enjoying it. And then when I decided to like extend and get a different visa, I was like, you know, by like the fourth year, I was like, wait, like this is actually the longer I stayed, the more I realized how um, different the culture was to like how I had grown up in ways that I found were like extremely insidious and like very like that. And that's kind of what I mean. Like it's so like subtle the differences, but like I think
Mhm.
that it's even worse that way. And I think that maybe like I just think I think it's interesting because I grew up like as a city kid, but like not in a city that like really matters to anyone. You know what I mean? Like, but I feel like because I grew up in like a very cosmopolitan place, like I think that like and I was allowed to like roam around like from a very young age. I think like, going to other cities has always been an interesting obstacle, but also like an adventure for me, and always like
Mhm.
kind of like testing it out. And um, yeah, I mean, like it's quite possible that it's benefited me from being in one of those cities because I think that other people are much more connected to like the pride of their city, and
Yeah.
I am defensive in some ways about Toronto, not to the extent of like Drake or something, but you know, like I I do like it in some ways.
So are your parents from there?
They both immigrated like when they were like 9 and 17. So kind
I'm just
of.
yeah. So I just wonder where you get your hustle and your literary styles from. Like, would it be from your parents or something else you picked up? Like you just
I
liked
mean,
reading.
I didn't read a lot, but I'm much more of like a film person. Like I watch
Mhm.
so much TV and like I came home. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents on my mom's side, and I would come home and instead of like I guess watching certain things like what normal kids would be watching, like talk show hosts or whatever.
Yeah.
I used to watch like I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched, and that was just like
Yeah.
every single day. Like this kind of
Okay.
old
And
fashioned.
now I'm being prompted. Sorry. To say to ask the audience to type the questions in the comments.
If you want me to answer questions, otherwise we can just keep talking.
Can I ask you one last question though, before we go to that? So when you think of your Issa Eppley in your book, do you think of um, this as a story of self-invention, or is it self-realization?
I think self-invention, because I think the whole idea is that it's like when she's alone, she always has to ask herself, like, who am I? Like, who am I outside of other people when I can't be bouncing off of like a a scene or like a conversation? Like, I don't know how to place myself. And I think it's kind of also the idea that like self-invention kind of, I think, like moves into self-realization at some point, like after you've done it for so long, like what becomes like real and what's true, like I always think about like, oh, if when people feel bad about like buying something that like look like at some point they feel like it looks odd on them, but it's at the end of the day like you kind of like made that decision to buy it, so maybe it is you know.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Okay, audience, whoever's out there, send in your questions, or I'll keep just asking you questions because I've got so many questions. So who are your heroes growing up? Like, writing this book, it feels so fully formed and so confident. I know you say your hero is yourself, and that at the end of the book,
No.
she does this. No. At the end of the book, she does this like great like declaration of selfhood that I just thought was so great. For 21-year-old, it's like so full of gusto. It's what every sassy 21-year-old wants to do, but few of them have the words for, probably, or it's like the purest kind of Leo declaration. Even if you're not a Leo, it's kind of channeling lots of Leo stuff. And it's great. And I just wonder if you had any literary heroes.
Oddly, so I think that one of the biggest one of the kind of adult novels I read as a like I don't know, like an 11 or 12-year-old that I found like really like it made like such an impression on me is actually like Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. Like I found it like really, and I think that like it's funny because like when I say that, like people are often like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense in a certain way because of the I think that novel is so interesting because it builds like this dialogue between these two characters that feels so unexpected and like kind of also in terms of using its environment and like textures and like flowers and colors and these things and building like memories and like, and it is like to me like such actually like a gothic novel in a way. And I always think of like the Hamptons section of the novel is kind of like my gothic novel, because I think at some point there is like there's a certain type of melancholy that's also cut through with like odd like surreal moments that I think for me, I remember writing it and I was like, this is actually really weird. Like that I'm writing this. It's like in certain parts, like when Issa sees the girl in the middle of the road and the girl's like dressed in like a gown with like jewelry. And like I think at some point when you're reading that, you're like, is Issa like having like a hallucination, or like is she actually seeing this, and like what does that mean for it, like her to be seeing this woman in the middle of the road? Like is that like her future self? Like I don't know. I think that was such an interesting exercise for me. So I'm really glad that you found that part very like
vivid and like it's like it's just so great that it kind of builds up to this thing, even though it's not the final thing in the book, but it's so clearly structured that all her experience has been kind of leading up to this kind of thing, but it comes so unexpectedly, and that's why it's so great. It's just like another day. She's like going up to the Hamptons and you don't realize this thing is going to come because it's written completely in your style where you don't telegraph anything to anyone ahead of time, so things actually read really vividly and they're really surprising, and I just think that's so fresh. And I wonder if all those things I love about your book, because I also love all these TV shows like Enlightened, all these like really good Succession, all these good shows on TV, which to me often are better than most novels. And I wonder if those things have been more influential on you as well, like just things that are just a little bit more sophisticated than often the literary establishment wants books to be, where as we talked about, they want things to be telegraphed a lot more, and maybe some of the things that you do are much like they're great, that may be suited for a more sophisticated audience than a lot of the gatekeepers think we have out there.
I'm actually one of those writers that will admit that I actually love watching television. Like I'm obsessed with watching television.
Same here. I mean,
love it.
that's what people do now. And I think, like more and more of the people who read our books are people who watch TV. So why don't we also write to reflect that and not adhere to certain kind of old-fashioned conventions, that might be 20 or 30 years out of date. So, like you were saying, as you were, trying to get this book published and people, didn't think that you did certain things correct dramatically or something. I think those things are your strengths. And I think that more and more people are going to start to realize that. And I hope that, you're going to find that those people are regretting whatever,
Oh my God. Me and my agent talk about this all the time. We're like, oh my God, is this our vindication moment? Like, is this our moment where we're like, like, we were right. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I honestly think that like, I would hope that with whatever happens with Happy Hour, like I would hope that at least encourages like people to be a little bit more adventurous in terms of like they want. And also because I think because publishing takes so long that it's really, I think people often think about what's good for right now when they're not actually thinking about like what's going to happen when it's actually out in like a year and a half or 2 years. Like what is the world going to be like and what will people's appetites need and want because they've had so much of what was happening already. Like and I always think that like everyone needs to hire a few like for the aesthetic stuff. I always say that they need to be hiring like some like fashion and e-com girls to help with the like graphics.
Yeah, no, the thing is, I mean, like with my film, it's a lot of people wanted me to lean into the whole Me Too thing because some things happened to me when I was a young late teen in making a film that was stolen from me, shirkers. And and the thing is, it just wasn't me and my friends. We just weren't victims. We just did not proceed that way. And somehow the narrative that was going to be an easier sell to the audience, I just could not do it, because it wasn't us. It was not authentic to us. So we just didn't go that way. And then you find a new level. You find a new, many more like people who are also identifying with you, who went through those things and aren't necessarily going to go that, I was a victim way, because they don't feel like a victim. They did learn something from the experience. And, like not every unfortunate thing that happens to you turns you into a victim, as you know. And I just love that, your book captures that. And I hope that more people who tell stories, women, actually do that. I think that's going to be hopefully the new way forward, rather than, because the Me Too thing is great. It's important, but that's just for whoever wants to do that, or feel that happened to them and want to tell their stories. But there are other people who've had things happen to them. You can't just like pull them into that thing and force them to be part of that movement when they're not necessarily feeling the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Did you feel that? Did you have that kind of pressure?
I think it was more just like, well, like something bad doesn't happen to them, and like how do they learn anything, right? It's like this. It's like an interesting dilemma that I think people are in terms of like how they want or think that they can sell women's media. I think in terms of
women's media, selling women's media.
Yeah, because I think that at the end of the day, like those like the all these movements were like very useful. I think at the end of the day, when we're thinking about in terms of like products and like how to sell stories, people were like being pushed, and like people publishing houses were like, let's mine some trauma
Exactly.
to like sell some
trauma porn. I just wouldn't, will not deal with that. Like, as you say, grief is a currency I will not use,
Yeah. And I think that's like, so it's like very valid. And I think that at the end of the day, like, I think that people kind of have started to realize that was like a situation where people were doing, and I think that was happening with people when people were getting paid like $200 for like a personal essay that exposed like all these like terrible things that happened to them in their lives. It's like, when you think about like how much that's worth in really like your long term, like the bigger picture, it's a particular style that I think that was like so rampant, especially with like that like an era that we just kind of like I think we're moving out of.
Yeah, with the plague, like the plague, hopefully, and with the end of the hopefully the end of the plague soon, your style will kind of take us forward, hopefully.
I hope so. That would be like nice and fun. Wouldn't it? A fun answer to the end of the plague.
Sandi, I do have a couple of questions of my own that you actually touched upon several of them in the last like 5 minutes since I've come on the screen. But I wanted to know, I specifically wanted to ask if there were any books or films that kind of were influential. So we've just talked about some of the television and how that kind of influences media as a whole, but I was curious if there were any specific books or films that may have influenced you.
So I would say the main influence for me was always like the actual original text of Gentlemen for Blondes. And then after that, I have always watched so much pre-code cinema. So when we think about like Ball of Fire with like any Barbara Stanwyck role, or like these kinds of like,
that's what I was sensing. You know, the screwball kind of you know, old-fashioned stuff where you know they're just ballsy dames, right?
Yeah, but also like, and I love and the thing about the screwball too is a lot of the women were so they were always like kind of pushy with the men characters, and they were always kind of like chasing the man at some point, and the man was like really like naive or like so shy to it. And I love like the way that the like that whole era of like even like books and film that kind of like really helped me in terms of like comedy. I think that was kind of the only way that I really could understand how my own humor would work in this situation, and like how to like use the girls' dialogue and like their like kind of like how they would talk back to people, like how that would work in like a fiction, like in prose form.
Do you carry a notebook with you?
Pardon?
Do you carry a notebook with you? Because some of those lines, they're so great. Huh?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have like lots of things. I usually, if I don't have anything, I will write stuff on my notes app. But I was saying in an interview recently that when I was a hostess at a restaurant, like sometimes I would just be like, and it would be dead or something, or it would be like in the like some early shift, I would just be like writing on backs of like menus, like one-liners or something. Yeah, no, I always carry something. It's kind of an issue, but I always say that also like my whole thing about writing, especially with dialogue, is like I'm always talking to everyone all the time. Like I literally talk to everyone. I don't know. And it's not like in a desperate way. I don't even know how to like not do it. Like it's not because I'm like lonely, but I'm just always like chatting. I don't know why. And I feel like people also like feel very open to chatting with me. So I think when you have that kind of relationship with the world, like I think like writing in a way that feels like very smooth, especially when it comes to like how people interact in conversation. It's a little bit more natural to me than I would think like other things. That's kind of like why I, in a way, like writing like screenplays and stuff is also kind of like a little bit more natural.
Yeah. And so your heroine, I forget my question now. Right. She goes through this whole, like she takes a whole bunch of jobs and from like being a foot fetish model at one point and modeling for artists and, you know, all kinds of things. What has been in your career the strangest job that has been inspiring?
I don't have anything about it yet, but I used to do this thing where I used to I nannied for a really long time. Like imagine also like me, because I'm exactly the same as how I would like come to work to nanny. Like I would wear like outfits and all these things. But I got this one job once where this woman was like, I have 2 teenage girls and they're kind of a little bit out of sorts maybe. And I was like, okay. And they were like, I go to work really early in the morning, so I'm gonna need you to come and like wake them up. And I did that like every morning, 5 days a week. I would come and they were like 16 and 18. I was like,
Wait, how did you get picked for this job?
I don't know. They liked the fact that I, for some reason, went to school for creative writing. I don't know why this was like. They were like, she was like, oh, like good influence or something, and I was like, okay. And like, I used to have to like pack their lunches. It was really funny. Like, and I'm like,
Where
not
was
a good
this? Was this in London or was
No,
this
it was
New
in
York?
Toronto. It was actually I just moved back from London to Toronto, and these girls were like very funny, and they didn't even have to wake up that early. They had to go to class for like 11. And I was like, it was a very odd, I was literally their alarm clock. And they were very like rebellious. So sometimes they just like wouldn't go to school. And I would have to be like, I would have to create a connection with them to be like,
Right.
if you don't go, you'd be disappointing me. And not even your mom, me.
But hopefully the parents were interesting enough that you could get a lot of fodder for stuff.
I mean, yeah, they also had like reptile like pets and stuff. It was very odd. There would be like there would be like when the snake would like shed its skin, they would just like leave the skins everywhere. It was very bizarre.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like one of the weird jobs I had.
So what do we have to expect from you next?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm like working a little bit on like, I tweeted this out the other day. I'm working a little bit on like a romantic comedy, but I am supposed to write my second book. I am thinking about that one. I always think about it. I have bits and bobs, but you know, I can't, I'm very, very non-committal.
And yet you've been like hotel hopping in New York.
I haven't been to hotel hopping. I've just
talk about that a little bit before we run out of time.
No. I've just been staying in my hotel like Rapunzel. I like can't. I like this. I'm like banished to like I can't go out because I feel so like weird about it. I don't know. It's like I have to like rest and then I do like all these things at night. I'm like a vampire. I basically like I close all my drapes. I like and then I kind of just like sleep like this. And all my friends have been sending me flowers, which is really nice. So it's like very funereal in here. Actually,
yeah.
It's like it's weird. I have bouquets everywhere. But yeah, no. I this trip is funny because like I feel very. I just get notifications all day on my phone. I've never had that before. I was here like a month ago, and that was kind of when I packed in all of my hangouts. And they were like, why are you making it so crazy? Like, you have like 3 people in one day that you're seeing. I was like, you don't understand. When I come back, I don't even know what's going to happen. Like, it's a mystery to me. Like,
so what are you going to do tonight? Do you have like plans?
So I've made friends. Okay, I have like, obviously I've made friends with the bartenders in my hotel. And when I went to get the water, I was like, I have an event again, but like you're all down here at the same time, so maybe I'll come down again. And yeah, they just know me as the girl who always like asks for a dirty martini and then says it's like too cold in the bar. I'm always like, it's very freezing. It's frigid in here. It's too cold.
I have very strong feelings on New York martinis. What are your feelings? Because I am a former bartender, and I have not found a like absolute amazing martini in New York. And I don't know what they're doing wrong, but they're not doing it right, in my opinion.
Well, how do you take it usually?
I mean, I can drink a martini like almost any way, like with a twist, dirty,
I'm really fussy about
dry.
my martinis. They have to be gin. They have to be really cold, and with
a twist.
Really cold. And the vermouth has to be nice. It has to be good gin. It has to be really good gin. Otherwise, it's yuck.
I think they might use like really terrible vermouth. Like I can't figure out what they're doing, but I'm just like, this tastes like a big shot of vodka, and that's not why you drink a martini. Like,
no, I mean, I actually really like this one place that's like a Russian cafe called Anyway, and I like them because they're like serious. It's like a serious Russian place, and it's not like one of those places that are like that I feel have gotten like really like seamy. Oh, kitty! But I had like a borscht martini for the first time. Actually, very good. I really like the beat with the vodka. I don't know. It was interesting, and I was like, oh yeah, I do enjoy like a savory martini. Some like I do like my martini's dirty with olives and stuff,
Yeah.
but my friend caught me at the Bowery the other night, like just like I kept like taking like the little like threes of olives and just like putting more into my thing. Like
Mhm.
I just didn't have dinner yet, and I was like, we're just gonna like do like a whole little like olive plate now, like in my glass.
And I just love that she just knows all her drinks and all her food and all the best places to go. You're
Mhm.
Issa Epley, and completely unapologetic. And it's going to be tricky sometimes paying the bill, but she manages somehow, or she just kind of
She doesn't
slips
break a
away.
sweat with that.
So
She
yeah,
doesn't break a sweat about thinking about the bill.
it's great. I mean, it's there's a melancholy at the underneath it all, but it's really underneath it all because she never apologizes, and I just love that she just keeps going.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I feel like you really got it. You understood.
I got it. I got it. And I got the fact that there's all those things like that people say are, like some of the stuffy old people think that it's are maybe flaws because your heroines don't learn enough, or when
Mhm.
bad things happen to them, and like those are strengths. I mean, that is the new way to go. And I think, hopefully more and more things are gonna go that way.
I hope so.
All right, well, I want to thank both of you for really just an incredible conversation, a really fun and lively. I feel like it represented the book very well, and I'm really happy that
Yeah, I would
we
never
were
say
able to do
yes
this.
to a boring to hosting a boring book. So I was happy to meet you. Like I'm so fussy about books. So I'm just glad that you wrote one that was so fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I do want to go to St. Louis at some point. I'm sad that I couldn't like actually go.
Yeah. Well, we would love to have you. So next book maybe, or just on a whim, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Maybe my
And
flight will get diverted again. That happened to me this trip.
I
Diversion from between Toronto and New York, you sends you to St. Louis will be fun.
yeah.
Ended up in Boston, Sandy.
Really? Wow.
Yes, I just stayed there for the night. I can't talk about it. Anyway. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I want to remind the audience that the book is available for sale at Left Bank Books. I will share the link again. And Sandy's fantastic book is also available and on our shelves now. So what a perfect way to combine and get both books at the same time and have them shipped anywhere in the country and actually anywhere in the world. So if you need international shipping, we do that
You
as
guys
well.
are too brave. Too brave to brave the post office, man. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I'm very good friends with our postal person who frequently sees me and is like, oh, no, not you again. And I'm like, yay, it's me again. Yeah. But yes, I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight and for being here. So we will see you all next time. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.